safe thus far, and grace will lead us home.
Just some of the sights and sounds as we look at the skyline of New York City that has been changed so dramatically. That is the scene where the smoke is still rising from the wreckage of the collapse of the Twin Towers there on Tuesday, and the Pentagon.
The Pentagon picture is just as jolting as you see that gaping hole in the southwest side of the building, and work continues there to try to return to some sense of normalcy and try to get back to what can be a real reach for a normal workday.
That's
there.
right. And the bad news yesterday is they do not expect to find any more survivors out of that wreckage. Those who might have survived the impact of that airplane certainly did not survive the fire that ensued. That fire finally under control, and the rebuilding process can now go forward. And later on we'll show you that wonderful shot of the American flag standing by.
And draped on one of the sides.
Draped on one of the sides of the Pentagon.
That is a good shot. We'll get to that.
It's hard to believe that it has been nearly 46 hours since the nation first learned that it was under a terrorist attack, and that realization of just what exactly that means is still growing, and certainly what the military response, if any, might be.
You know, it's difficult enough for us as journalists. It's difficult for adults to grasp everything that has happened, our great loss, but victims of families have faced the wrenching task of trying to explain to their children just what has happened to their loved ones.
They asked if he was in heaven, and I said yes. And of course they were crying. And after the tears cleared, they asked if they could call him on his cell phone.
Well, Tom Burnett was among a group of passengers that apparently tried to foil the terrorist plot on United Flight 93, a very heroic act. The plane crashed in a rural Pennsylvania field.
Yeah, we are just beginning to learn that from cell phone calls made from these flights. That call saying that some of the male passengers had decided to get together and try to overtake the terrorists, and that is the last that some of their family members heard from them. So we will hear more about those heroic acts. In the meantime, we've got some other pictures to show you, these from outer space. Orbiting satellites and the International Space Station's three-man crew caught a frightening view of the destruction. There you see it from space, from 240 miles up. The crew got this view of lower Manhattan before the horrific attacks, and then suddenly compare this now, the smoldering ruins and the New York skyline without its 28-year-old landmark towers.
But back down to earth and the scene from the destruction on lower Manhattan, and we go back again to our colleague Garrick Utley, who is with us in New York. He's been up for much of the night. Garrick, again, you'll see the sunrise from your vantage point, and there's much to ponder here as it seems like this day we start the grieving process. It seemed like it was anger and then shock, and now many people are into this grief mode.
And indeed, a mixture of grief and anger and anxiety and perhaps even fear as to what's going to come next. But a moment ago, Vince and Carol, you were showing that scene from the satellite of lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center there, and then suddenly gone, no longer there. And over my shoulder right here, you can see the plume of smoke, which has been there ever since those buildings collapsed. But something strange has happened this morning as the sun indeed is coming up, or the light is coming up over the east side of Manhattan, if not yet the sun. That plume of smoke is circling all the way around. The wind has shifted around the southern end of the island, over my right shoulder. You may not be able to see it, and all the way up here, the east side. It's as if a shroud now is being wrapped around Manhattan Island. Again, nearly 48 hours after those two planes struck the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. Well, as the new day starts this Thursday, the papers are out, and no surprise as to what they're offering the 7 million people plus in New York City. This is the New York Times, again, a banner headline about the stunned rescuers working, the FBI tracking the hijackers' movements and wondering what's going to happen next. In the New York Daily News, well, in bleak headlines, red letters, 10,000 feared dead. and scenes of the rubble and the rescue workers. And finally, the city's other tabloid, the New York Post, if I can control the wind right here, it doesn't have a headline. How about that? No headline.
I might have a headline for you right here, Garrick.
It does have a picture, there you go, a picture of the American flag being raised there, 3 firemen down at the site of the disaster, and the quote, "gave proof through the night that our flag was still there," and indeed it is. Also down there in Lower Manhattan is Alessio Vinci, who's standing by to give us the latest on the rescue efforts. Good morning, Alessio.
Well, good morning, Garrick. Well, we've seen that picture from space of the big thick cloud of smoke still raising from the debris, and we can provide you a picture closer up here. The debris, the cloud. I'm going to try to get out of the way here. The big thick cloud here. Provoked by still smoldering metal and iron, and we have seen some pocket of fire. I think the camera can zero in here a little bit, tilting up the camera a little bit. There's a little bit of fire here and there. I mean, obviously nothing compared to what the scene was here 24 hours ago, but still, as you can see from these pictures, not only there is still a lot of smoke, but also a few pockets of fires, and this of course making the work of the rescue officials, the rescue workers difficult and indeed very dangerous, because of course it is extremely hot there still. It is still very difficult to work in that kind of environment. They have to use gas masks, and of course the buildings all around there is also very unstable. We have seen several refrigerator trucks getting closer to the area there. Obviously those refrigerator trucks will be used to take some of the body parts and the bodies back to the morgue.
Alessio, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt. This is Vince Cellini in Atlanta at our studios. We do want to pass this along and get back to you that we understand that after the FAA shutdown of a couple of days ago, the airports are opening around New York. Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark open on a limited basis for travel. So that is a positive news as we try to regroup from this. And now I will return to you, Alessio. So Thank you. Pardon my interruption for that news.
Not at all, Vince. On that note, we actually heard a couple of jets, military jets, flying overhead here several hours ago. So certainly now we're going to perhaps start hearing a couple of commercial jets flying back into JFK and LaGuardia airports. I was just telling you that we have seen earlier on some refrigerator trucks and also some dumpster trucks that were brought into the area. Obviously, the refrigerator trucks to bring some of the body parts and the bodies back to the morgues, and the dumpster truck to remove, so far we understand, more than 3,000 tons of debris that have been already collected on site and be brought away from the site to make some more room for the rescue operation. The mayor of New York, Ralph Giuliani, asked the Federal Emergency Management Agency to deliver 6,000 body bags. This means that despite that the official count, the last official count, has 82 people dead, and 16 of those 16 have been identified, they do expect more people once the rescue operation continues, well, now entering into its second day in about a few hours. Back to you, Garrick.
You mentioned the airports will be opening on a limited basis. That means that those planes which were headed towards Kennedy or LaGuardia or Newark on Tuesday morning when the terrorists struck and were diverted, most of them to Canada, especially the international flights, those passengers have been waiting up there in Canada unless they decide to come down in a rental car or by train. And now those passengers and only those flights will be allowed to come into the New York airport starting this morning. It's not expected to be later in the day or indeed tomorrow until further air traffic is allowed into the New York City area. Otherwise, schools will be open, museums are open, Times Square is going to be filled because the Broadway shows are open. Life will be getting back to as nearly normal as it can be, considering what's happening down there at the foot of Manhattan Island. Vincent Carroll.
All right, thank you very much, Garrick Utley, as we are slowly creeping back to some signs of normalcy. But first this, national correspondent Gary Tuchman has gone where police and firefighters, doctors and nurses and emergency people, only they have gone, into the heart of this terrorist attack there in New York City. Watch this report.
I have to tell you, first of all, there are no cameras allowed at Ground Zero. And to be frank, I'm not sure reporters are allowed at Ground Zero either. However, a very kind soul, a medical professional, decided to take me along to the site, wanted me to see it, wanted me to be able to tell America and the world about what happened because she just thought it was so horrible. And I have to tell you something. This is much, much, much worse than I possibly would have imagined, and we've been here for 2 days now, just 4 blocks away. You can't tell how bad it is until you're right on the site. And let me tell you, first of all, what I saw. There are at least 10 blocks in each direction of heavy damage. It's not just the World Trade Center complex. It is hundreds of other businesses that have been heavily destroyed, moderately destroyed, or slightly destroyed. Some of the businesses that have been destroyed are Burger King, a well-known department store next to the World Trade Center called Century 21. J&R Music World is a well-known record store and computer store and electronics store that has some damage. For blocks and blocks, about a half a mile from north to south, there is heavy debris in the streets. There are cars tipped over, trucks tipped over, just lying in the streets. It reminds me of a ride at Universal Studios called Earthquake. And when you go on the Earthquake ride, everything flips over and things catch fire and there's debris and there's sand, and that's what it looked like to me when I got there.
Obviously a big task ahead for those rescuers in New York and also in Washington trying to find any survivors in the Pentagon. Dave Hannon, though, has a forecast here that I think these rescue workers are not going to like.
Yeah, it's not the best of forecasts. Weather certainly has not been a factor thus far, but we are looking at the threat for some showers beginning later on tonight. So not a bad day today in New York and in Washington weather-wise. Let's show you what's going on. We take a look at the radar first of all, and there is a strong cold front working its way towards the East Coast. This is going to cool the temperatures off. It's rather warm. Temperatures have been in the 80s. They will return by later on tonight and into tomorrow to much cooler readings. Here is the forecast for New York City. We are looking at mostly sunny conditions today. A forecast high is in the low 80s, and then showers move in most likely after midnight tonight. We're talking about rainfall amounts generally about 1/4 to 1/2 inch, with overnight lows into the 60s, and then much cooler tomorrow. And after some morning showers, the sunshine will return, a forecast high of about 66. Much the same forecast for Washington, D.C. Better chances for rain the further north you go, so that rain chances are better in New York City than they are in Washington. But we will see some scattered showers, we think, overnight tonight with forecast lows of 62, and then cooler in Washington tomorrow. Forecast highs there into the upper 60s. So weather may very well indeed play a role later on tonight, especially from midnight to about 6 in the morning, the best chances for rain in New York.
Wow. Difficult hours anyway.
Yeah, the search operation is continuing 24/7 at this point.
Right.
So
I guess if there's any good news, it is going to be cooler. That certainly is help to rescuers. Beginning tomorrow, temperatures back into the 60s.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, in the meantime, we're going to show you this shot that we talked about earlier. There it is, the American flag draped over the side of the Pentagon, just off to the side from where a jetliner crashed in to this military nerve center of the United States. Just one symbolic show of support for the rescue operations going there, and what we are increasingly seeing as the undying spirit of the American people as Washington and our nation's leaders try to consider what sort of response is necessary to these terrorist attacks. In fact, that it will be a big day at the White House today. President Bush and his advisors are pressing Congress for billions of dollars for cleanup as well as for this investigation. In fact, they're talking about as much as $20 billion. CNN White House correspondent Kelly Wallace joins us with more on that. Hi, Kelly.
Hi again, Carol. That's exactly right. In fact, lawmakers likely to get an emergency spending bill up to about $20 billion, as you noted, to the president's desk as early as this afternoon. This would basically authorize the U.S. to go ahead and spend that money for search and rescue efforts, for rebuilding operations, and of course for the investigation and any counterterrorism efforts. Now, the second part of what you mentioned, we do know negotiations underway between White House officials and lawmakers over what would be a congressional resolution basically authorizing the U.S. to retaliate for those terrorist attacks. We know negotiations continued well into the night last night, likely to continue today. The big sticking point is really over the wording of this resolution, because while lawmakers of both parties definitely believe the U.S. should respond and certainly hold those deemed responsible accountable, there is a concern on the part of some lawmakers about any resolution, in essence, giving the president a blank check for military action. Now, as for some developments to report, we did see lawmakers turn out Wednesday evening for a prayer vigil. Lawmakers of both parties getting together to reflect on the tragedy that has hit many cities in the entire country and to come together. And then, of course, we did see the president heading over to the Pentagon late yesterday afternoon.